Good afternoon. My name is Beatrice Rangel. I am a board member of the Interamerican Institute for Democracy, and my role is to take care of international relations. It is my distinct pleasure to give the most cordial welcome to our keynote speaker today, Dr. Valentyn Prodaievych, which was the former president of the Economic Court of Odessa, and who is going to discuss whether Ukraine, the current crisis in Ukraine, it's the door for the beginning of a new era of Russian imperialism, and what are the implications of this development for Latin America. The Interamerican Institute for Democracy is a non-for-profit with the objective to promote and disseminate the values of freedom, democracy, human rights, and institutional building in Latin America. It's made up of scholars, politicians, professionals, business people, men and women of different nationalities. It is a think tank that has no partisan biases, and it achieves its objectives of strengthening the values of freedom and democracy through the organization of events like congresses, fora, colloquiums, and also by conducting research on topics that either reinforce democracy or threaten democracy in the Americas. It has an editorial fund that has over 60 books published on themes and subjects that deal with the institutional strengthening of democracy in Latin America. We greet you from our headquarters, our chairman, Tomás Regalado, our very distinguished spokesperson, Valentyn Prodaievych, Professor Luis Fleischman, who's a member of our board of directors, and Dr. Ricardo Israel, who's also a member of our board of directors. The colloquiums at the Interamerican Institute for Democracy have a format by which we have a main speaker that has 20 minutes to develop a subject, and then two or more commentators can either pose questions or comment on the presentation, and each will have 3 minutes to do so. Our colloquiums do not aim at concluding on one recommendation or another. It's just an opportunity to discuss in depth sub-subjects that are affecting democracy and freedom in the world. Today, we are here gathered to discuss the crisis that is undergoing Ukraine, which is the victim of the expansionist aim of Russia. Russia, which is now led by Mr. Vladimir Putin. According to Mr. Putin, Ukraine, it's the platform that the West uses to threaten Russia's independence. On the other hand, Ukraine fears, and the West fears, that what Mr. Putin is really aiming at is to blur all the frontiers between East and West and make advances on the West. Ukraine, to my mind, has the very bad luck of being located in the very, very far end of Europe, where they almost meet the Asian continent, and where the eternal struggle between East and West has taken place. So therefore, Ukraine has been the prey of many invasions. This starting in the 13th century with the Mongols, and then the Mongols not only took over Ukraine, but they destroyed everything that was known as civilization in that land. Other invaders included the Commonwealth of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Tsarist Empire of Russia, and finally the Soviet Union. It's only from 1991 when Ukraine really becomes an independent and free country. That independence and that freedom that was obtained through the very strong will and determination of the Ukrainian people is today threatened, because there is a relaunching of the Russian imperialism that most likely will not stop at the borders of Ukraine, because what it is seeking is to have its status as a world power codified by the West and the East and the West. In order to understand this process better and determine what are the implications for Latin America, we have invited Dr. Valentyn Prodaievych. So I would like very much to start this colloquium by asking our president, Tomás Regalado, that delivers his welcoming remarks. Tomás Regalado is a very admired journalist of South Florida, who also was twice mayor of Miami, and today has a program with very high ratings in Mega TV. Welcome, Dr. Regalado.
Thank you very much, Beatrice, and good afternoon for those in this hemisphere. Good evening for those watching in Europe and other areas of the world, because this is about the world. This is about survival. This is about the need to be informed, and frankly, we are hungry here for information, correct information. We seem to have everyone now is predicting what Putin is going to do. However, we want to hear from an expert, a person that is a protagonist and that it feels very much to him, because that's his country. I think that this is important, and I think that the Institute has done the right thing, and we thank Willy Cueto for helping Beatrice in organizing this event, because the President of the United States just said yesterday that to defend democracy, it takes sacrifice from the American people, and that we will see the pain at the gas pump because of the crisis. Hopefully, this crisis will be dealt with by the world. But hopefully, the President of the United States will understand that to fight for democracy, we also need to be in this hemisphere with the countries that are now hoping for a helping hand to bring back liberty. So welcome, and a great welcome to our viewers and our speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tomás. Now, we are going to invite to take the floor Dr. Valentyn Prodaievych. Valentyn Prodaievych is a public figure in Ukraine. He's a politician, a lawyer, and a journalist. He was the president of the Economic Court of Odessa from the 15th of July of 2002 until October 2011. He is the founder of the patriotic website from Ukraine called Ucrania. Mr. Dr. Prodaievych, please come to the podium.
Would you like me to stay here?
Я приветствую всех слушателей и хочу выразить благодарность институту за приглашение выступить здесь.
Good afternoon to everyone who listens, and I speak with gratitude to this organization who invited me to speak.
Происходящее сегодня событие – это не локальный конфликт между Россией и Украиной, а это вызов, который бросила Россия и Путин всему демократическому миру и миропорядку.
What's happening today is not a local conflict between Russia and Ukraine. What's happening today is a conflict between Russia and the entire world, and the call to order of such.
Естественное право человека – это право на мир, которое ему даровано Всевышним и нашим миром, нашей природой.
The natural right of a human being is the right to freedom that's given, the right to happiness that's given to him by God, given to him by nature of birth.
Это право закреплено во многих конституциях, но сейчас мир подошел к тому, что это право должно быть не просто провозглашено, а должны существовать механизмы защиты этого права.
This right is described in many constitutions. However, this right is not guaranteed. We need to come up with the mechanisms that will be controlling and enforcing this right for each of us.
И то, что мы сейчас обсуждаем, то, что должно за этим последовать, это действия, направленные на выработку механизмов защиты мира, когда он оказывается в таких ситуациях.
And what we're discussing here today and what we need to come up with is that mechanism that reinforces this human right and protect each of us from what's going on today with Ukraine.
Особенная задача Соединенных Штатов, народа Соединенных Штатов, политиков, конгрессменов – это способствовать выработке таких механизмов, по всей видимости, на базе Организации Объединенных Наций.
The goal of the United States, its government and people, is to develop that mechanism on the basis of the United Nations that will enforce international law of human rights and freedoms.
Мир не должен полагаться на мнение отдельных глав государств и политиков, как им действовать в такой ситуации, а должен быть выработан алгоритм, при котором мир реагирует на попытки, в данном случае России, привести мир к самоуничтожению.
The world cannot rely on opinions of different world leaders and their ways. We need to rely on algorithm and system of control and developing certain action that will help the world maintain order, and it will help prevent situation that Ukraine ended up with conflict with Russia, namely Vladimir Putin.
Это я дал мотивацию, которая есть у меня. Я думаю, что она будет у слушателей, когда они воспримут ту информацию, которую мы сейчас обсуждаем.
This is my motivation, and I hope listeners will understand me and will be on the same page with my train of thoughts and what I'm about to discuss with you.
Теперь я бы хотел немного дать информации по поводу Украины, России, конфликта, потому что американские граждане, безусловно, не имеют столь широкой информации вообще о истории взаимоотношений и о том, что на самом деле происходит между Украиной и Россией.
I'd like to give a little bit of background information regarding relationship between Russia and Ukraine, since American citizens don't have enough.
С личности Путина, с его психотипа, психопортрета, потому что это очень важно.
I'd like to begin with describing of a psychological type of Vladimir Putin. It's really important.
Когда президент Клинтон заканчивал свою работу, он обнародовал материалы Центрального разведывательного управления по Гитлеру. Это так называемые документы Гитлера. Они были секретны, но не...
President Clinton was finishing up his presidential term. He made certain documents public that relates to World War II, namely regarding Adolf Hitler and these papers are really important and related to my story.
Согласно этих документов, Гитлер был психопатом, у которого была мания, он считал себя мессией, он сравнивал себя с Христом, и он считал, что он единственный человек, который может спасти Германию.
According to these documents, Hitler was a psychopath. He compared himself to Christ, that.
И когда меня спрашивали, нападет ли Россия на Украину, я просил перефразировать вопрос, нападет ли Путин на Украину.
So, before when I was asked, would Russia attack and invade Ukraine, I was always asking to rephrase the question and ask if Putin will attack and invade Ukraine.
Потому что Путин обладает всеми характеристиками психопата и маньяка. Он готов достигать своих целей любыми путями. Его не остановят ни человеческие жертвы, ни принесение в жертву всего мира.
Because it is ambitions of Putin and his psychotype that will be driven to achieve his goals at any cost, disregarding all the possible and impossible sacrifices in his motherland and all over the world.
И для того, чтобы понимать его действия и правильно на них реагировать, нужно понимать, кто он.
In order to understand him and react properly, we need to understand who he is.
В одной из своих статей в 2014 году, которая называлась «Киевский патриарх и зачем Путину нужна Украина», я об этом писал еще там 7 лет назад, 8 лет назад.
In 2014, I published an article that called Kiev Patriarch, where I posed the question, who is Putin and what his motivations are.
Уже тогда было видно, что Путин себя так же, как Гитлер, считает мессией, и он возложил на себя обязанность воссоздать Российскую империю, которая будет стоять во главе мира.
It was obvious then in 2013 that Putin considered himself Messiah who needs to resurrect former Russian Empire and dominate the world.
То, что делает он сегодня, он пытается воссоздать мир двухполярный, но за этим последуют его попытки создать однополярный мир во главе с Россией.
What he's trying to do right now is to create bipolar world. But what will follow is his attempt to create a world of one power dominance.
Мир стал двухполярным после попытки Гитлера такой мир создать и развязать Вторую войну, но в результате этого двухполярного мира стало два полюса – США и СССР.
After World War II, an attempt of Hitler to create bipolar world, there were slightly changes. His dreams didn't come true, but what happened? We had two major systems, United States of America and Soviet Union.
Эта ситуация существовала до распада СССР, и после этого мир имеет один полюс – это Соединенные Штаты.
The situation existed until USSR fell apart, and from then on, up until now, the world have one superpower, which is United States of America.
То, что сегодня делает Путин, это не попытка просто завоевать Украину, это попытка создать двухполярный мир.
What Putin does today is not an attempt to conquer Ukraine. It's an attempt to develop new world order.
И если Советский Союз получил такое положение благодаря войне, Путин понимает, что у него нет достаточно сил, чтобы получить это дипломатическим путем, финансовым или экономическим, ему тоже нужна война.
Soviet Union became superpower because of war, Second World War. And today Putin understands that no economic, political, and diplomatic moves will give him such power, nothing except war.
И он с маниакальной последовательностью будет этого добиваться, и его пока ничто не останавливает.
Nothing will stop him at achieving his goal. He will proceed just like maniacs do.
В документах ЦРУ по поводу Гитлера сказано, что когда его спросили, почему он идет ва-банк, он сказал: «Я всегда иду ва-банк».
According to CIA documents that were released about Hitler, Hitler was asked once, why is he attacking other countries? Why is he acting like this? It's very dangerous. To what he answers, I always go va-bank, I always go against the current.
И сейчас Путин не блефует, это не блеф, он идет ва-банк.
Today Putin is not faking, he is going va-bank, he's going straight against the current.
Сегодня он ставит существование Украины, завтра он готов будет поставить опять ва-банк, но уже может пойти на существование мира.
Today Ukraine is in danger and its existence is questionable according to him. Today's Ukraine, tomorrow is the same gonna be for other parts of the world.
Чем это грозит? Чем угрожает сегодняшняя ситуация?
So what's the actual danger of today's situation?
Если позволит Путину делать сегодня то, что он делает, и он попытается создать двухполярный мир, то это отразится на жизнедеятельности всех государств и цивилизации в основном тоже.
If we will allow Putin to do what he does right now and let it be, he will create bipolar world and it will affect every country and every citizen of every country, and all the ways of we're living today not going to be the same.
В первую очередь на жизни Соединенных Штатов.
Most importantly, it will affect United States of America.
Потому что это война не между Украиной и Россией, это война между Россией и США. И у меня в 2014 году была статья, которая называлась «Битва титанов». И я описывал во времени, что это наступит скоро.
It is not a war between Russia and Ukraine. It's a war between Russia and the United States of America. In 2014, I wrote an article called Battle of Titans, and in my article I described that this particular events will happen soon, and so it came to happening today as we speak.
Многие страны, которые настроены не желательно к Соединенным Штатам, это Китай, это Иран, это страны и Южной Америки, они, безусловно, могут присоединиться к второму полюсу России.
The country that don't have friendly relationship with the United States, such as China, Iran, and certain other countries from Latin America, will join Putin in his efforts to create bipolar world.
Мы, я думаю, об этом побеседуем. Я уже тогда дал краткое свое видение, я постараюсь закончить.
I gave you my brief vision, and I'll stop at that.
Путин так себя вел, потому что ему позволяли, когда он шел ва-банк, все сбрасывали карты и позволяли ему делать то, что он делает, отходили в сторону.
Putin acts the way he acts because he was allowed to act this way, because everyone else folded their cards and let him be and do what he does.
Европа относится достаточно лояльно к его действиям, то есть они не сопротивляются им. Единственная страна, которая может сопротивляться и которая заинтересована в сохранении демократии в мире, являются Соединенные Штаты.
Europe is quite loyal to Putin and offer very little resistance. The only country that can resist and oppose Vladimir Putin is the United States of America.
Попытки Украины стать членом Европейского Союза и вступить в НАТО пока не дают результатов. И если они не дадут результатов, то помочь Украине и вообще исправить ситуацию, опять-таки, могут только Соединенные Штаты. От позиции Штатов зависит дальнейший ход событий.
Attempts of Ukraine to join European Union and NATO failed. The only country that can help Ukraine to maintain its position right now and survive is United States.
Например, сегодня в Черном море находится 78 единиц флота России, из них 18 боевых эсминцев, которые имеют на вооружении суперсоник, и нет ни одного корабля стран НАТО.
Currently, in the Black Sea, there are 78 ships of Russia, 16 of which have ultrasonic weapons. None of the ships from the United States or European countries are there at the time.
Как могут поступить Соединенные Штаты сегодня, и как они будут поступать?
How can the United States act and how they will act? That's the question.
Безусловно, санкции, которые вводятся, это важный инструмент.
Of course, sanctions that were imposed recently are an important instrument. However,
Да, есть только одно замечание. Эти санкции должны быть действенные, они должны быть эффективные.
they only know those sanctions, they have to be real, they need to be effective.
Когда сначала звучала информация о том, что в качестве санкций может быть отключение России от SWIFT, это прозвучало очень сильно, и я знаю, очень испугало Россию.
Previously, it was mentioned that Russia will be disconnected from SWIFT code, and it was a very effective and strong promise.
Но потом под воздействием финансовых транснациональных корпораций, кругов, этот пункт убрали, потому что здесь появились финансовые интересы транснациональных корпораций и финансистов всего мира, включая финансистов США.
Shortly after, this sanction was off the table because certain economic interest of international and American companies prevailed, and the sanction is no longer enacted.
Понятно, что в крупнейшей компании России «Газпроме» 20% принадлежат British Petroleum, 27% находится в компании Соединенных Штатов, и деньги и получение прибыли – это важно.
Gazprom is the largest gas production company in Russia. British Petroleum is 27%, and so is the United States. And obviously, this is really important aspect.
Но зарабатываемые деньги сегодня, цена их через некоторое время, может быть, гораздо больше за это придется заплатить, потому что в оценке должны быть сегодня не деньги, а благополучие мира, мир сам, демократия в мире, то есть то, что ждет завтра.
There's a very high price to pay for the money we make right now. It should not be the focus. The focus should be prosperity and peace among all the nations.
И поэтому санкции, они не должны носить формализованный характер, а они должны быть определенным оружием, которое может остановить агрессию.
Sanctions cannot be formal. They should be a weapon that can stop aggressions.
И следующее, мое мнение, что вполне возможно, поскольку НАТО не пытается взять Украину, то, возможно, имеет место союз, определенные союзы военно-политические между США и Украиной.
In my opinion, if Ukraine cannot join NATO, there should be economic and military union between Ukraine and the United States.
И в Соединенных Штатах, в отличие от России, где все решает один человек, Соединенные Штаты – это страна демократичная. Здесь есть народ, есть его мнение, есть мнение политиков, есть мнение очень многих уважаемых людей. И это мнение, оно должно сформировать свою позицию США в этом вопросе.
Unlike Russia, where one person decides everything, United States is a democratic country. We have politicians, we have civilians, wonderful people, wonderful minds, where collectively can make right decisions.
Я не пытаюсь навязать какое-то мнение, я всего лишь даю информацию и хочу привлечь внимание слушателей для того, чтобы они сформировали свое отношение и для себя решили, что для них важно. Мир, будущее детей, либо экономический интерес.
I'm not opposing my opinion, but I'd like to stress the fact that we need to make choice between what's important, our economic interest or peace and prosperity of our children.
Вкратце я ситуацию рассказал, и если есть вопросы, с удовольствием отвечу на них.
I'd like to take questions now, if there's any.
He's taking questions. He wants to take questions. Any questions?
No, we are going to have the comments now.
And then questions.
And then the questions.
Сейчас звучал комментарий, потом вопросы.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So now we are very clear. This is not going to stop here. There are designs for the West that are very, very dire. Now we are going to ask Ricardo Israel, who was graduated as a lawyer, who became a lawyer at the University of Chile in 1972, was visiting researcher at the University of Pittsburgh, was assistant professor at the University of Essex in England, and he has worked in the United States as visiting professor Fulbright and Wheaton College in Massachusetts. Mr. Israel is also a member of the board of directors of Interamerican Institute for Democracy. Welcome, Ricardo.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Prodaievych. I hope I said it right. Because we have heard since this crisis started a lot on the position of Mr. Putin and Russia and the position of the government of the United States, but not a lot about what's the position of Ukraine. So in that sense, you are very welcome. I think that Putin has been successful because many times the people who are in the other side have been wrong about his motivation. The question, if this will be the start of an awakening, or he repeat his success of 2014, his success in Crimea, his success in Syria and in Georgia. Will Ukraine be the victim? Will this be the end of Donetsk and Lugansk as part of Ukraine and will become part of Russia? Will be imposed on Ukraine a solution similar as the ones that were found during the Cold War for Finland and Austria, in the sense of an imposed neutrality? And I would say that I'm very much pessimist in the sense that sooner or later there will be a negotiation with Mr. Putin. Perhaps it will remind me of the second part of the missile crisis of Cuba, that after the missiles went back to
to the Soviet Union at that time. There was a negotiation for the missiles in Turkey to come back to the United States. What does he want Putin? I think that the mistake is to see it in terms of the Soviet Union all over again. And I think that Ukraine is a means to another end, the Great Russia. This has been undertaken since Vladimir Putin became president of Russia. Why would United States accept at the end of a negotiation? I would say that all what is demanded today of Putin will be part of that negotiation, and I think that there is three reasons why the United States and the West could accept that negotiation. One has been clear until he decided to recognize the popular republics of Donetsk and Lugansk. That is a division in the West, clear in Syria, in Iraq, Afghanistan, but also clear in Europe. There is not the same interest in oil and gas when half your gas depends on Russia. And beside that, I think there are three things. The most important one is China. Russia is not today the main adversary. This great Russia, or the reproduction of what the interest, the national interest was at the time of the Tsar, is for Europe and for Asia, not for the whole of the world. And really the great division in 21st century is between China and United States. And I think that still Russia is the alternative in the arms race, still a major power in terms of arms. I think in the days when there was 50 years since Richard Nixon changed, together with Henry Kissinger, the history of the 20th and the 21st century, going to China, I think that is also true in the sense that for the United States, it's a national interest to get Russia to be as neutral as it could be under Putin. The second one is jihad, as is shown in Chechnya and in Syria. Russia and Putin are willing to confront the jihad, the Islamic jihad, with soldiers and boots on the ground. And the second one is a minor one, the arms. Let us remember that that when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was discussing a new arms race that still has not had a new solution. There is not a new treaty, and the United States is affected in the sense that those was designed for a type of medium-range missiles, not to be in Europe, but are precisely the ones that are needed for the new theater in Asia. Will happen? Will Ukraine pay the price of this negotiation? Not necessarily. I think that every time you start a negotiation, what is asked at the beginning is not what will be arrived at the end. This will be the start. But is in my back the president of Georgia, the president of Crimea, and also what happens in 2014, a de facto Popular Republic of Donetsk and Lugansk. Will the sanction be successful? We are in uncharted territory because of something different to when we speak about this confrontation of the United States and China. People have in mind what happened during the Cold War, but it's not exactly the same. The Soviet Union was contained in the expression of Mr. Kennan, and by the way, Mr. Kennan said in 2008 or 2014 that people like Putin are not moved by economic sanctions, but by geopolitical incentives. And Mr. Kennan, in the contention of the Soviet Union, never had what is happening today with China, the possibility of confronting the United States at the same level economically. And I end with something what is very important. There is a very important concept of the Cold War that perhaps will be part of that negotiation if it happens, and what will decide what happened with Ukraine is the concept of the red lines. It has been lost. Perhaps the last time that was used by President Obama in relation to Syria, that the red lines are what is not to be accepted, what not to be crossed, has completely disappeared. And I think that is a welcome opportunity for everyone knowing what has not to be crossed. And perhaps what has not to be crossed is what Putin has done. This, what has been done, is against not only the means, not only against means, the base of any solution, but also against international law. It was not accepted at the time that Iraq could not change in the name of history the border it has with Kuwait. And for the same token, it cannot be accepted because of any interpretation of history that you can change by force the border recognized by international law. Once again, welcome Mr. Prodaievych, and thank you.
Thank you so much for those commentaries. Now we are going to introduce Mr. Professor Louis Fleischman, who's a doctor in sociology of the New York School of Social Research from New York. He has he's a master's of the new school, and he's also a bachelor's in science, in political science and labor studies of the University of Tel Aviv. Luis is also a commentator in radio and television, and is a member of the board of directors of the Interamerican Institute for Democracy. Welcome, Luis.
Thank you so much. What an honor to have Mr. Prodaievych here. I hope I pronounce your name well. And hear directly from him. First of all, I would like to make some comments in reaction to what Mr. Prodaievych said. I really appreciate your words. Two things I want to say. I absolutely agree. Richard Haas, who is he's the president of the Council on Foreign Relations. There is a book that he wrote called The World in Disarray. And there he says that Russia and China have limited ambitions. That means both Russia and China want to control the so-called nearest abroad. That means Russia cares about the Ukraine, China cares about the southeast, the South China Sea and the East China Sea, but they have no ambitions beyond that. Well, the reality is that I totally agree with Mr. Prodaievych and very much against Richard Haas that that's not the case. I don't think they want to destroy the liberal order, but certainly they want to diminish the liberal order. By the way, something that you mentioned has never been part of a liberal order. The Human Rights Commission is totally taken over by the former Soviet Union and by its clients. So there is no way we can have a Kantian type of international relations system where the law is, when you have the rule of international law. That was not possible under the liberal order, and certainly will not be possible in the future. I also agree with Mr. Prodaievych that the United States is probably the strongest power capable of resisting this kind of aggression. We have seen the Europeans in the past. We have seen the Europeans surrendering to Arab boycotts. And we have seen now the Europeans hesitating, very concerned about that dependency they have on gas and oil, on Russian gas and oil. Nonetheless, I have to say that despite all the errors, the leadership of President Biden was able to bring together the Europeans in a unified way against the Russian aggression, and that includes also other countries. For instance, I'm hearing that the sanctions, even if they are soft for the time being, have been joined by countries such as Australia, Japan, and a few others. So I think the world is now united, and I really hope that sanctions actually serve as a deterrence to the Russians, and hopefully we will reach an agreement. And I agree with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Ricardo Israel, that it's extremely important to somehow find peace with Russia, and not only because China is a more serious adversary, but also because if we actually get along with Russia, we will be able to solve many other problems in the world, including Syria, as an example that also Ricardo mentioned. The question is, can we really reach an agreement with Russia? And that's a big question. I believe we can, but it depends on how strong we are. That means to what extent we can impose strong sanctions and force Russia to the negotiations table, and to what extent the United States develops what is called a much more global foreign policy that right now it doesn't have. So what do I mean by that? First of all, I agree with Mr. Prodaievych that Russia probably, if he takes over the eastern provinces, these two eastern provinces of the Ukraine, he's going to move forward into other parts of the Ukraine, or maybe he can threaten the Baltics as well. We never know. Or other former satellites of the Soviet Union. The second thing is that it's very important to know what Russia is doing, all right, outside the direct threats, outside these threats of war. For instance, what Putin is doing. Putin is supporting every dictatorship in the world at this point. Every dictatorship in the world. And one thing that I found, and we know, is that every country that moves from transitions from democracy to dictatorship, including former allies of the West, like Turkey, Hungary, Poland, Venezuela, they also change their foreign policy. And they usually change their foreign policy for the worst, not for the best. So Venezuela, Turkey, Hungary, and Poland, some of them are already outside the realm of influence of the United States and the West, and some others probably in the future will be outside the realm of influence of the West. Russia knows how to take advantage of these dictators. They support dictatorial candidates, right? Tyrants. And of course, they bring them to their sphere of influence. For instance, the entire political leaders of the right wing, I'm talking about the extreme right wing in Europe, actually love Putin. And they follow Putin. Somebody like Orban is totally right, Orban from Hungary is totally right now in the pockets of Putin. Poland, not yet, because of their particular history with the Russians. But we never say never. One day they may be in the pockets of the Russians. So we have to be very careful. But there is another thing. the Russians have been involved in Latin America for a long time. Okay? They are involved in Venezuela, providing weapons. They provide weapons to Nicaragua. They provide weapons to Cuba. And these three countries today are a huge threat to regional security. Consequently, they are also a threat to the United States. So, not only that, we have other countries that have what is called left-wing leaders, for instance, Peru, Chile, and we don't know in what direction they are going to go. Remember that the left in Latin America is very much, tends to be anti-American. And as a result, it will be very easy for them to buy into the Russian influence, all right? Or to be subjected to Russian influence. Just a few days ago, we have seen the president of Argentina, Alberto Fernandez, saying to Putin in China in a meeting in Beijing, I open the doors for you. I can open the doors of my country so that you could have access to Latin America. Lula da Silva may be the next elected president in Brazil, and he for sure is going to go to the Russian side. How do I know that? Because he belonged in the past to BRICS, if you recall, and Brazil was part of BRICS. In fact, the B stands for Brazil. In theory, it was an economic alliance, but in practice was a political alliance. So another thing, Russia right now is playing a game. The Iranian president is visiting Russia. I can assure you that Russia is going to use Iran against the United States and its allies in the West. So I believe that already Russia and also China are supporting Iran, and they certainly don't mind if they develop. So I think it is very important to find some sort of understanding with Russia. I agree with Ricardo that it is possible, but it depends on our strength. Peace has to come through strength. And not to speak about if we fail, if the United States fails to confront Russia properly, we are going to have the Chinese threatening Japan, threatening Taiwan, and maybe South Korea. So I think this is a very serious moment that goes well beyond the Ukraine. And I think it's a huge test for the United States and its allies. Thank you so much.
It indeed is a text for the West, for the American leadership, and for Europe. But the question is, are they going to face this challenge up to the point where they can prevent war, or the fear of entering into a larger conflict is going to freeze the West? And that's this question I'm going to pose to our distinguished guest. The other question that I would like to pose to you is, today the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that for them it was not acceptable that any country in the world would lose its sovereignty and its territorial integrity by force. Does this mean that China could be the buffer in this crisis? How do you really think that China is going to adhere itself completely to Russia, or is there any hope that the Chinese interests collide with the Russian interests and therefore China plays a buffering role?
Опять-таки вернусь к своим статьям 2014 года, когда я описывал эту ситуацию, я обратил внимание на Китай и на его позицию.
Let's go back again to my articles from 2014 when I started to pay attention to China and its position.
В результате Первой мировой войны и Второй мировой войны некоторые страны, в том числе, например, Соединенные Штаты, получили определенные преференции.
After World War I and World War II, certain countries, including United States, received certain benefits.
И Китай демонстрирует свою позицию и политику в последнее время следующим образом. Это чисто китайская психология. Он сидит на горе и ждет, когда будут драться два тигра.
So recently China demonstrated typical Chinese psychology, sitting high on a mountain, looking down and see how two tigers are fighting.
Он ждет ослабления России, потому что от Урала у него проживает на территории России более 6 миллионов человек официально.
He's looking what's going to be happening to Russia, how it's going to weaken. On the territory of Russia, 6 million Chinese are currently residing.
Практически все газодобывающие компании Сибири, основная часть этих компаний, акции принадлежит Китаю.
Most of the gas production company in Siberia are served by Chinese.
Он ждет, когда большой русский медведь упадет.
So he's waiting until big Russian bear will fall.
По поводу США Китай не может сегодня соперничать, но он надеется на этот конфликт, и в этом конфликте он попытается извлечь максимальную пользу.
Currently, China cannot really compete with the United States, but he's waiting for its conflict and to get maximum benefits for himself out of it.
Потому что человеческий фактор промышленности и военный у Китая очень сильный, но история их существования, она гласит, что это очень хитрые люди с хорошей военной стратегией.
There's very large human, technological, and industrial factors involved in China, but knowing this particular nation, we should never forget how clever and smart they are to use the situation to their advantage.
Если они выступят, если их попросят стороны выступить буферной зоной, цена за это должна быть заплачена очень большая в пользу Китая.
If you're going to ask China to become a mediator, a buffer between Russia and the United States, the price is going to be very high to be paid.
Сегодня позиция Китая исходит из следующего. Китаю не нужны войны, потому что в первую очередь они знают, что не должна пострадать их торговля.
Today's position of China is the following. They do not need a war. Why? Primarily because of the economic factor and their economic development. It will affect them negatively.
Когда Путин сейчас прилетел в Китай на Олимпиаду, его официально не встретили, его посадили с некими президентами там, Туркменистана. То есть Китай демонстративно не оказал какую-то привилегию Путину. Они выжидают, чем закончатся отношения между Китаем и США.
When Putin arrived to Olympic Games, he was not greeted personally, and he sat with other presidents, such as President of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. That shows that Chinese are waiting for the right time and see how the situation is going to be turning.
В дальносрочной перспективе я считаю, что для Соединенных Штатов Китай представляет большую угрозу, чем Россия.
In the long term, Chinese pose way bigger danger to the United States than Russia.
Особенно опасен их союз.
Especially dangerous the union of Russia and China.
Поэтому правильно было сказано до меня выступающими, что сегодня нужно продемонстрировать свою силу. Это должно быть со стороны США сделано.
I agree with other speakers that today we need to demonstrate our power, and our power demonstrated should be really strong on behalf of the United States.
К сожалению, история последних десятилетий показывает, что в мире стали превалировать сильные лидеры, и, к сожалению, когда все зависит не от мнения государств и народа, а от мнения лидеров, такие конфликты возникают все чаще и их все тяжелее сдерживать.
Unfortunately, history of past decades shows that world order depends on opinion of leaders. And when the world order depends on opinion of leaders, there are a lot of mistakes happening, and the margin for error is large.
Но система демократии для того и существует, чтобы механизмы демократического решения таких конфликтов существовало, а не полагались только на решение отдельных лидеров, диктаторов.
That's why we have democratic government, where we can decide on a problem together without relying on the decision of one person, a dictator.
И еще я бы хотел сказать вот по поводу замечания там по Луганску, по Донецку, буквально там несколько слов.
I'd like to say a few words in response to comments about Donetsk and Lugansk regions.
Сепаратисты существуют в пределах своих территорий, которые занимают не более 1/3 Луганской и Донецкой области.
So-called separatists exist on the territory that occupied actually 1/3 of Lugansk and Donetsk, not the entire territory.
Вчера Путин объявил, что он считает, что эти две республики должны занимать две области, что гораздо больше. И на тех территориях, где нет сепаратистов, там находятся украинские военные, там находятся люди, которые не хотят быть в этих республиках.
In yesterday's announcement, Vladimir Putin counted Donetsk and Lugansk as one whole. That would include not only regions where separatists staying, but also regions where Ukrainian military is staying currently and Ukrainian citizens are living.
Уже несколько дней обстреливают город Мариуполь. Он находится в Донецкой области, но находится на территории Украины.
In the past few days, the city of Mariupol was under fire, and the city is on territory of Ukraine, which is also part of Donetsk Oblast.
И, соответственно, словами Путина, российская армия начнет освобождать территории, так называемые освобождать, то есть захватывать территории этих двух областей, там, где сегодня находятся военные вооруженные силы и граждане, которые считают себя гражданами Украины.
Putin, he will move forward beyond area where separatists staying, and will go in an open conflict with Ukrainian military and civilians.
Это называется война.
It's called war.
Она не стоит вопрос, начнется ли она началась, она уже идет.
There's no question if it's going to start, it's already started.
И поэтому ряд стран, она должна выйти из зоны предположений, а войти в область действий.
So instead of guessing, we need to move in the stage of acting.
И правильно было сказано, это рубеж, это Рубикон, после которого наступят последствия.
And I agree with the previous speakers. Yes, there is a Rubicon, there is a line that's crossed, and the circumstances and consequences are great.
Наша история общая, она гласит о том, что история ничему не учит.
Our history teaches us that we learn nothing from it.
Но я думаю, наступает то время, когда история должна учить, когда нужно делать выводы из предыдущего и в дальнейшем действовать уже с учетом исторических и ошибок, и событий.
But I think we're entering time where we need to learn from our past mistakes, we need to learn from history and calculate our steps really carefully based on it.
В 1664 году Российская империя подвела 100-тысячное войско на Украину для того, чтобы Украина приняла определенные политические шаги.
In the year 1664, a large Russian army moved into Ukraine and really forced the country to accept certain conditions.
В результате Украина потеряла армию, флот и право общения с зарубежными странами.
So Ukraine lost army, fleet, and right to communicate with nearby countries.
Эта история, она была, и сегодня она просто повторяется. Это повторяются одни и те же события, они выпадают на долю людей. И главное, что каждый следующий раз принимали правильные решения.
It's a history, it's happening again, it's happening to real people, it's really important to make right decisions now.
Главное не события, а реакция на события. Поэтому я призываю всех отнестись к этому серьезно. Это, еще раз, это не конфликт Украины с Россией.
Our reactions to these events are crucial, and we're asking all the people to pay attention.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker, Dr. Valentyn Prodaievych. Thank you for our commentators. And please follow us through this streaming presentations. Our next forum is Wednesday next week. Thank you for watching us and for following and supporting the Interamerican Institute for Democracy.